The first thing Emma Rodriguez felt was warmth. Not the harsh fluorescent lights she remembered from her 3 jobs, but something gentle, like sunlight filtering through expensive curtains. Her body felt foreign, as if she'd been sleeping for years instead of what seemed like minutes. "Come on, Emma. I know you're fighting to come back." The voice was deep, educated, with the kind of confidence that came from Ivy League lecture halls and country club dinners. But there was something else, genuine tenderness that made her heart skip. With tremendous effort, Emma cracked her eyes open. The first face she saw was devastating. Sharp jawline, kind brown eyes framed by wire-rimmed glasses, and dark hair that probably cost more to maintain than her monthly rent. He wore scrubs that looked designer somehow, and when he smiled, it transformed his entire face. "Welcome back, Emma." The way he said her name made her stomach flutter. There was an intimacy there that didn't make sense. She was just a nurse from St. Mary's Public Hospital. This man looked like he belonged in medical journals and hospital galas. "Doctor," she croaked, her throat dry as paper. "James," he said softly, helping her sip water from a cup that definitely wasn't standard hospital issue. "Dr. James Mitchell, you've been sleeping for 6 months, Emma." 6 months. The word should have terrified her, but something in his voice made her feel safe. That's when the door burst open and a woman in a $3,000 dress swept in. "James, darling," she announced, not even glancing at Emma. "The wedding planner called. The ceremony is in 4 hours and your mother is having an absolute meltdown about the seating arrangements." Emma watched James's face go pale. The woman was stunning in that polished, untouchable way. Blonde hair in a perfect chignon, jewelry that could pay off student loans, posture that screamed boarding school and trust funds. "Victoria, this isn't the time," James said, his voice suddenly formal. "Oh." Victoria finally noticed Emma, looking at her like she was an inconvenient stain on expensive upholstery. "The patient is awake. How nice." She turned back to James. "The cars will be here at 5. Don't be late." And then she was gone, leaving Emma with a sinking feeling and James looking like he'd rather disappear. 6 months, Emma repeated when they were alone. "My family, my jobs, my student loans." James sat heavily in the chair beside her bed, a chair that looked like it had been specifically brought from somewhere expensive. "Emma, there are things we need to discuss. Your family has been here every day. Your hospital, St. Mary's. They've been holding your position." "St. Mary's can't afford to hold positions for 6 months, Emma said slowly. "And I can't afford 6 months of medical bills. My insurance—" James looked uncomfortable. "Your care has been handled." "Handled how? I work 3 jobs and still can't make ends meet. This room alone must cost—" "Emma." His voice was gentle but firm. "You were in a specialized care unit. The treatment you received, it wasn't standard protocol." Something cold settled in Emma's stomach. "What kind of treatment?" James stood up, pacing to the window that overlooked not the crowded parking lot of St. Mary's, but a pristine courtyard with actual landscaping. "You had a traumatic brain injury from your car accident. Conventional treatment said the prognosis wasn't good." "Where am I?" "Presbyterian Elite Medical Center." Presbyterian Elite? The hospital where she'd applied for nursing positions 3 times and been rejected each time, where the nurses wore designer scrubs and the patients had VIP suites. "I can't afford this place for 6 hours, let alone 6 months." James turned back to her, conflict clear in his eyes. "Emma, I need to tell you something about your accident. You were driving home from your Uber shift at 2 a.m. when a drunk driver hit you. You were unconscious when they brought you to St. Mary's emergency room." Emma nodded. This part made sense. "But your injuries were beyond what St. Mary's could handle. They were going to transfer you to County General, but—" He paused. "I was doing a consultation at St. Mary's that night. I saw your case. And I had you transferred here instead, against protocol, against hospital policy, against everything my department chair told me." Emma stared at him. "Why?" James met her eyes, and in them she saw something that made her breath catch. "Because everyone else saw statistics. Another uninsured patient who probably wouldn't make it. But when I looked at your chart, I saw Emma Rodriguez, 26 years old, First-generation college graduate working 3 jobs to pay off student loans while helping support her family. I saw someone who deserved a fighting chance. The revelation hit her like a wave. This wasn't just a doctor treating a patient. This was personal. "Dr. Mitchell," Emma said carefully, "what exactly did my treatment involve?" James looked like he was making a decision that would change everything. He walked to a cabinet and pulled out a thick medical file. "Emma, what I'm about to show you. It could end my career if anyone finds out." He opened the file, revealing pages of notes in his handwriting, medical charts and brain scans. But what caught Emma's attention were the dates, detailed entries for every single day of her 6-month coma. Day 1. Patient Emma Rodriguez admitted with severe TBI. Standard protocol suggests minimal intervention. I disagree. Beginning experimental treatment program. Emma looked up at him. Experimental? Day 15. Emma's brain activity shows unusual patterns during music therapy. She seems to respond to classical music, specifically Mozart. Note: increased daily music sessions. Day 23. Breakthrough. Emma's vitals stabilize when I speak to her about her nursing school achievements. She seems to hear and respond to positive reinforcement about her goals and dreams. Emma's hands were shaking as she flipped through pages of entries. 6 months of daily notes. 6 months of a renowned neurosurgeon spending hours with an uninsured patient who shouldn't have been his responsibility. Day 67. Emma squeezed my hand today when I told her about the scholarship program I'm developing for first-generation medical students. I know it sounds impossible, but she's listening. She's fighting. Day 134. Had to skip the hospital board dinner tonight. Emma's vitals were unstable and I couldn't leave. Victoria isn't understanding why I'm so invested in this case. How do I explain that this patient has become the most important part of my day? Emma stopped reading and looked up at James. You wrote about me every day for 6 months. Emma, the treatment you received, the experimental procedures, the around-the-clock monitoring, the specialized equipment, it saved your life, but it also cost $847,000. The number hit her like a physical blow. 800? James, I'll never be able to pay that back. My family will lose their house. I'll never... It's already paid for. Emma stared at him. What? I paid for it, all of it, the treatment, the equipment, the room, everything. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma felt like the world had tilted off its axis. Why? She whispered. James sat back down, leaning forward with his hands clasped. Because somewhere around day 30 I realized I wasn't just treating a patient anymore. I was falling in love with a woman who was fighting harder to live than anyone I'd ever met. Before Emma could process what James had just confessed, the door opened again. This time it was an older man in an expensive suit, silver hair, commanding presence, the kind of person who owned things instead of working for them. James, he said, his voice carrying the authority of old money and older power. We need to talk. Now. James stood up stiffly. Richard. Emma, this is Richard Whitman Sr., CEO of Whitman Medical Group. Emma's blood chilled. Whitman Medical Group owned half the hospitals in the state, including Presbyterian Elite. And if his last name was Whitman... Mr. Whitman, Emma said carefully, Victoria's father. Richard's smile was cold as winter. Very perceptive, Ms. Rodriguez. Yes, Victoria is my daughter, and James here is about to become my son-in-law in exactly 3 hours and 47 minutes. James stepped forward. Richard, Emma just woke up. This isn't appropriate. What's not appropriate, Richard interrupted, is a doctor spending $847,000 of unauthorized funds on an uninsured patient. What's not appropriate is that same doctor canceling 3 board meetings, missing 2 surgical conferences, and turning down a department chair position at Johns Hopkins because he's obsessed with a comatose patient. Emma felt sick. You knew he was spending time with me. Richard's laugh was humorless. Ms. Rodriguez, I know everything that happens in my hospitals. Every procedure, every expense, every minute my staff spends on cases that don't generate revenue. Emma isn't a case, James said, his voice dangerous. She's a charity case who's caused enough problems. Richard turned to Emma. Do you know what your little miracle recovery has cost, besides the money? James was offered the youngest department chair position in Johns Hopkins history. He turned it down because he couldn't leave a patient. He's missed networking events, research opportunities, advancement chances, all for a patient who statistically should have been transferred to County General 6 months ago. Emma looked at James, seeing the truth in his eyes. "You sacrificed your career for me." "James sacrificed our family's reputation," Richard corrected. "The medical community is talking. People are asking questions about why a Whitman Medical Group surgeon is so invested in an uninsured patient. Some are suggesting inappropriate relationships. Others are questioning his professional judgment." The manipulation was clear, but Emma could see it was working. James looked torn between duty and desire. "But," Richard continued, "I'm a reasonable man. James, marry my daughter today as planned, and we'll quietly transfer Ms. Rodriguez back to County General for her recovery. No one asks questions, no one gets hurt, and your career continues on track." "And if he doesn't?" Emma asked, though she dreaded the answer. Richard's smile turned predatory. "If he doesn't, I'll have to report the unauthorized use of experimental treatments, the misappropriation of hospital funds, and the ethical violations involved in a doctor becoming personally involved with a patient. James will lose his medical license. You'll be transferred to County General with a $847,000 medical debt that will destroy your family's finances for generations." The room fell silent except for the sound of Emma's heart monitor beeping rapidly. "There's more," Richard said, producing a tablet. "Ms. Rodriguez, your family's immigration status has some irregularities. Your mother's work visa, your brother's student status. It would be unfortunate if ICE received an anonymous tip about a family defrauding the healthcare system." Emma felt the blood drain from her face. "Oh, you wouldn't." "I would. I will. Unless James marries my daughter today and this entire situation disappears quietly." James looked between Emma and Richard, the weight of impossible choices clear on his face. "Choose carefully, James," Richard said, heading for the door. "You have 3 hours to decide what's more important, your career and this young woman's family's safety, or a fantasy romance with a patient who is unconscious for your entire relationship." After he left, Emma and James sat in horrified silence. "James," Emma said finally, "you have to marry her." "Emma!" "No. Listen to me. I won't let you destroy your career for me. I won't let my family be deported because I was in an accident. Marry her, please." James looked at her with an expression of pure anguish. "Emma, you don't understand. These 6 months, falling in love with you, it's the most real thing I've ever felt. Victoria and I. It's what our families planned, what makes business sense, but I don't love her. I love you." "Then love me enough to let me go," Emma whispered, tears streaming down her face. After James left to prepare for his wedding, Emma lay in her hospital bed feeling like her heart had been surgically removed. That's when the door opened quietly, and a woman in scrubs peeked in. "Emma, I'm Sarah, head nurse here at Presbyterian. Can I come in?" Emma nodded, wiping her eyes. Sarah was in her 50s, with kind eyes and the efficient movements of someone who'd spent decades caring for people. She pulled up the chair and sat down. "Honey, I've been working here for 25 years. I've seen a lot of doctors, a lot of patients, and a lot of relationships. But what I witnessed these past 6 months, that was something special." "It doesn't matter now," Emma said. "He's getting married." "Is he?" Sarah smiled mysteriously. "Emma, did you know that Dr. Mitchell isn't the only one who's been keeping records?" She pulled out her phone and showed Emma a video timestamp from 2 months earlier. "Hospital security footage isn't admissible in court, but it sure is interesting to watch." On the screen, Emma could see her hospital room in grainy black and white. James was sitting beside her bed holding her hand, clearly talking to her unconscious form. But what made Emma gasp was seeing her own hand squeeze back. "That's impossible," Emma whispered. "I was in a coma." "Watch this part," Sarah said, fast-forwarding. On screen, James leaned down and whispered something to unconscious Emma. Her face, even unconscious, smiled. "Emma," Sarah said gently, "you responded to Dr. Mitchell for 6 months. Your brain activity spiked when he entered the room. Your vitals improved when he talked to you. The experimental treatment worked because you were fighting to get back to him. But Richard Whitman, is about to learn that Presbyterian Elite has more loyal employees than he realizes. Sarah stood up. Emma, every nurse on this floor has watched Dr. Mitchell fight for you. We've seen him skip meals, cancel appointments, and spend his own money because he believed you were worth saving. We're not about to let Richard Whitman destroy that. The door opened and 3 more nurses entered. Maria, Linda, and Jennifer. They looked like they were on a mission. Emma, Maria said, we need to tell you some things about Richard Whitman that you deserve to know. Like what? Like the fact that he's been systematically shutting down public hospitals and buying them for corporate development, Linda explained. St. Mary's is next on his list. He's been denying experimental treatments to uninsured patients for years, Jennifer added. Dr. Mitchell saving you is exactly what Richard can't allow. It sets a precedent that patients matter more than profit. Emma sat up straighter. What are you saying? We're saying, Sarah said, that this isn't just about stopping a wedding. This is about stopping a system that values money over lives. And we think you're the key to exposing it all. Maria handed Emma a thick folder. Hospital financial records, treatment denials, immigration status investigations Richard ordered on families who couldn't pay their bills. Everything. Why are you giving me this? Because, Sarah said, you represent everything Richard Whitman hates. A working-class woman who survived because a doctor cared more about saving lives than following profit margins. You're proof that the system can work differently. Linda sat on the edge of the bed. Emma, Dr. Mitchell didn't just save your life. He accidentally created a case study that proves experimental treatments can work when doctors are allowed to care about patients instead of insurance policies. Your recovery is going to be studied in medical schools, Jennifer added. You're going to change how doctors treat brain injuries, but only if Richard Whitman doesn't bury the research to protect his business model. Emma looked at the folder, then at the faces of the women who had cared for her. What do you need me to do? Sarah smiled. We need you to crash a wedding. Sacred Heart Country Club was exactly what Emma expected. Old money, older traditions, and the kind of wealth that came from generations of never having to worry about medical bills. Emma sat in the wheelchair Sarah had insisted on, wearing scrubs and a hospital gown, feeling completely out of place among the Armani suits and designer gowns. You sure about this? Asked Maria, who had driven her here along with Sarah, Linda, and Jennifer. No, Emma admitted, but I'm sure about him. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows she could see the ceremony in progress. Victoria looked stunning in a dress that probably cost more than Emma's nursing school tuition. James stood at the altar in a tuxedo that fit him perfectly, but Emma could see the tension in his shoulders even from a distance. The minister was speaking about marriage, about commitment, about choosing love over all obstacles. The irony was painful. Gabriel Santos, the minister said, do you take Victoria Whitman as your lawfully wedded wife, to have and to hold in sickness and in health for richer or poorer, as long as you both shall live? Emma watched James hesitate. It was just a moment, just a breath, but she saw it. That's when she pushed open the doors. The sound echoed through the country club like a gunshot. 300 guests in designer clothes turned to stare at the young woman in a wheelchair wearing hospital scrubs. Emma heard gasps, whispers, the sound of someone dropping champagne glasses. But she only had eyes for James. When their gazes met, she saw relief flood his face, pure, undeniable relief. Emma, he breathed, his voice carrying across the silent room. Victoria turned, and the fury in her eyes could have melted steel. I told you this would happen, she hissed through her perfect smile. Emma began rolling down the aisle, each turn of the wheels echoing in the silence. The guests watched like she was a car accident they couldn't look away from. James, she said when she reached the altar, I need to talk to you. Emma, you can't be here, Victoria interrupted, stepping down from the altar. This is my wedding. Actually, Emma said, keeping her eyes on James, I think this wedding is about choices, and James deserves to make his with all the information. James stepped down from the altar too, ignoring Victoria, ignoring the shocked minister, ignoring the murmurs of 300 guests. He knelt beside Emma's wheelchair. How did you know where to find me? He asked. I had help, Emma said, gesturing to the nurses who had followed her in. And I remembered some things. What things? I remember your voice telling me to fight. I remember the music you played. I remember feeling safe even when I was lost." She paused, gathering courage. "And I remember falling in love with you, James. Even unconscious, even not knowing who you were, my heart recognized yours." And then he kissed her, right there in front of 300 shocked guests, with wedding flowers scattered on the floor and the sound of FBI agents making arrests in the background. It was the most perfect kiss of her life, because it was the first kiss she'd given while being completely conscious of loving someone who loved her back. The silence in the country club was deafening. "That's impossible," Victoria said, but her voice had lost its confidence. "Is it?" Emma asked, finally looking at her. "Or is it just inconvenient for your family's business plans?" Richard Whitman stepped forward from the front row, his face dark with anger. "Enough, security!" "Wait," Emma said, raising her voice so the entire room could hear. "Before you call security, I think your guests should know what kind of man you really are, Mr. Whitman." She opened the folder Sarah had given her. "Ladies and gentlemen, did you know that Whitman Medical Group has been systematically denying experimental treatments to uninsured patients? Did you know they've been shutting down public hospitals to increase their profit margins? Did you know that Mr. Whitman has been using immigration investigations as threats against families who can't pay their medical bills?" Murmurs began rising from the crowd. "That's enough," Richard shouted. "Security!" "Actually," said a new voice from the back of the room, "I'd like to hear more." Everyone turned to see a woman in her 60s walking down the aisle, perfectly dressed, silver hair and an elegant updo, carrying herself with the authority of someone used to being listened to. "Mom," James said, standing up. "Hello, darling." James's mother reached the altar and looked between Emma and Victoria. "I'm Margaret Mitchell, and before this ceremony continues, I have some things to say." She turned to address the crowd. "Most of you know me. You know my family has been in medicine for 4 generations. You know we believe in helping people, not profiting from their suffering." Margaret faced Richard Whitman. "Richard, I've just spent the last hour on the phone with the State Medical Board, the Hospital Ethics Committee, and several investigative journalists. It seems your business practices are about to become very public." Richard's face went pale. "Furthermore," Margaret continued, "I've spoken with the Board of Trustees at Johns Hopkins. They're very interested in offering my son that department chair position again, especially now that they know about his groundbreaking work with experimental brain injury treatments." She looked at Emma with warm eyes. "Work that saved the life of a remarkable young woman who represents everything we should value in healthcare, fighting for patients regardless of their ability to pay." Emma felt tears streaming down her face. Margaret turned to James. "Son, you have a choice to make. You can marry a woman you don't love to advance a career you don't want, supporting a system that goes against everything our family has stood for. Or you can choose love, choose your principles, and trust that doing the right thing will lead to the right life." James looked at Victoria, then at Richard, then at Emma. When he spoke, his voice was clear and strong. "Victoria, you're an incredible woman. You deserve to be loved completely, without reservation, without doubt. But I can't give you that because my heart belongs to someone else." He took off his ring and gently placed it in Victoria's hand. "I'm sorry, but I can't marry you when I'm in love with Emma." Victoria stood for a moment holding the ring. Then, with a dignity Emma hadn't expected, she nodded. "You're right," she said quietly. "I deserve to be loved completely, and you deserve to love without compromise." She turned to Emma. "Take care of him, Emma. He's one of the good ones." As Victoria walked away, Richard Whitman faced his destroyed plans with rage in his eyes. "This isn't over," he told James. "I'll destroy your career. I'll make sure—" "Actually," Margaret interrupted, "your own career is about to be quite thoroughly destroyed. The FBI is very interested in your Medicare fraud, and the State Medical Board wants to discuss your pattern of treatment denials." 2 men in suits entered the country club. "Richard Whitman, FBI, you need to come with us." As Richard was escorted out, James turned back to Emma. There was so much love in his eyes it took her breath away. "Emma Rodriguez," he said, still kneeling beside her wheelchair. 6 months ago you taught me that love doesn't need permission to exist. You showed me that caring about someone isn't about what you can get in return, but about what you're willing to give." He took her hands. "I love you. I've loved you since the day I met you. And if you'll have me, I want to spend the rest of my life loving you consciously. Yes, Emma whispered. Yes to everything. Emma stood in the garden behind the new Rodriguez Mitchell Free Clinic, watching James teach medical students about experimental brain injury treatments. The clinic occupied the building that used to house Whitman Medical Group's corporate offices, seized by the federal government and sold at auction to a nonprofit they'd created. The key to successful treatment, James was explaining to the residents, isn't just medical expertise. It's understanding that every patient is someone's daughter, someone's sister, someone worth fighting for. One of the students raised her hand. Dr. Mitchell, is it true that you spent your own money to treat an uninsured patient? James smiled, his eyes finding Emma across the garden. I spent money to save the woman I loved. She saved me right back. Sarah, now head of nursing at their clinic, appeared beside Emma. How are you feeling about tomorrow? Tomorrow was their wedding, not at a country club, but right here in the clinic garden, surrounded by the nurses who had helped them, the patients they'd treated together, and the families they'd served. Nervous, Emma admitted. Happy, grateful. Any doubts? Emma looked at James, watching him inspire the next generation of doctors to see patients as people, rather than profit centers. None. Well, maybe one. What's that? I keep wondering if this is all too good to be true. 6 months ago, I was working 3 jobs just to pay off student loans. Now I'm married to the most incredible man I've ever met, running a clinic that's changing lives. Sarah laughed. Emma, you've earned every bit of happiness you have. You fought your way back from a coma, exposed a corrupt medical system, and helped create something beautiful. This isn't luck. This is what happens when good people refuse to give up. James jogged over to them, still energized from teaching. How did I do? You made 3 future doctors cry when you told our story, Emma said. I think you did just fine. Good. He pulled her into his arms. Because tomorrow I get to marry my favorite success story. I'm not a success story, Emma protested. I'm just a nurse from St. Mary's who got lucky. No, James said, his voice serious. You're proof that love can exist in impossible circumstances. You're proof that fighting for what's right always wins in the end. You're proof that the best things in life are worth waiting for, worth risking everything for. He kissed her softly. And tomorrow I get to promise to love you consciously for the rest of our lives. As the sun set over their clinic, over the community they'd built together, over the life they'd created from the impossible, Emma knew that sometimes love really could conquer everything, even unconsciousness, even time, even the systems designed to keep people apart. Their love story had started with a woman in a coma and a doctor who refused to give up. It was ending with 2 people building a future based on the simple revolutionary idea that everyone deserves to be loved, cared for, and fought for. And that was the most beautiful miracle of all.